Welcome to another episode of Post Daily Dose. With me, your trusted parenting advisor, faithful guide and servant on the healing journey. What's my name? Big Papa Brian+Post. And in tonight's episode, we're going to talk about the problem with consequences, i.e. love and logic parenting. So I hope you're ready for that. I hope everyone has had a fantastic day. I hope your evening's winding down. I hope everyone's starting to settle down. And I hope you're getting ready to have a really good night's rest, because tomorrow is yet another day that you are going to go and kick butt and conquer the day. But before you do that, let Big Papa talk to you for just a little bit about consequences. And I have been talking about consequences for a long time. And to just full disclosure, one of the very first classes I ever taught was a love and logic class. I read a book. I went to an attachment conference, picked up a bunch of different books, read one about love and logic, and I thought, hey, this is the stuff right here. And so I read it and went to a school and taught them about consequences and, talking to children a certain kind of way when they behave. And love and logic has been around for a number of years. And I disagree with it. There's no other way to say it than that. In fact, I co-authored probably the first book to come out and really debate the premise was Beyond Consequences, Logic, and Control. And that was the first book that I think that ever gave parents a different way of looking at consequences with children. But let me tell you about hi, Angela. Oh, Angela's joining us from Australia. I'm glad it's a lovely morning in Australia. It is a lovely evening here in Oklahoma. Here's my not issue, but here's what I want to share with you all about consequences in parenting. So, the premise is that we have to give a child a consequence for their behavior. Meaning when they misbehave, we need to give them some consequence, because after all, the premise is we all learn from consequences. And that from the very beginning, that premise is flawed. So we don't think about it because we're used to hearing this over and over and over and over again, throughout our growing up. We all learn from consequences. You have to be given consequences in order to be taught responsibility. That's the premise. So it doesn't veer off much further than that. You give children consequences for their behavior so they can learn how to take responsibility. So what I want to do is I want to break that understanding, that flawed understanding down for you just a little bit by giving you some very basic scientific principles. Number one, when a child is in a state of stress, they regress. That's number one. And I would encourage you to write that down. So when a child stresses, they regress. Number two, in a state of stress, our thinking processes become confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. In a state of stress, our thinking processes become confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. Number three, and that particular one, that goes for both parents and children. Number three, when we give children a consequence for their behavior, we are modeling reactivity, because a consequence is a reaction to an action. A consequence is not a response to an action. It is a reaction to an action. Because without the action, you don't give the consequence. Once the action happens, then you have a reaction to it, and therefore you give the consequence. So that's very important to remember, that we give children consequences as reactions to actions. That's number three. Number four is children learn 90% of the time through modeling. That's how children learn. They learn through modeling the behaviors and the actions of the adults that are around them. So that's number four. Okay, so let me see if my short-term memory will allow me to recap these 4 points before I hammer home why consequences, the concept of giving children consequences, is actually ludicrous. Number one, because children who are in a state of misbehavior are stressed out children. Because an acting out child is a stressed out child, and a stressed out child is a regressed child. So number one, the child is cognitively and chronologically regressed, meaning they are regressed to an emotional state. That is the state from which they are operating from, the emotional state. The emotional state is dictating the behavior. The emotional state is dictating the thinking. Very important. So you're giving a 13-year-old a consequence intended for a 13-year-old, but emotionally you're actually consequencing a 3-year-old. Now, I'm going to take that really deep here in a moment, if I can remember, circle back to it. Number two, in times of stress, our thinking processes become confused and distorted. That goes for the child and for the parent. So when your child is stressed and misbehaving and regressed, that means their thinking is confused and distorted and they cannot remember. When your child is stressed and is acting out and is stressed and regressed, that means you're probably stressed too, because misbehavior stresses us as parents out. So you're probably stressed. So when you become stressed, you are more inclined to be less conscious of your reactions. So you give your stressed out, acting out, regressed child a consequence. Your stressed out, acting out, regressed, cognitively confused, memory suppressed child a consequence, and you expect them to learn from it. You expect them to remember. You expect them to learn how to take responsibility, which just by nature of the front end of the child acting out, therefore being stressed out, therefore being regressed, therefore not thinking clearly, therefore not having an active and available short-term memory, that tells you right then the odds are fully stacked against them learning anything. Okay, the odds of your child learning anything, just at this point, are fully stacked against them. They're not going to learn. But what you also have to realize is you are now modeling reactivity. So you're not actually modeling responsibility. You're modeling to your child reactivity. So what they may learn, if there's any capacity to learn anything, they're going to model the fact that you are being reactive. Therefore, they're more inclined to be reactive as they get older than they are to be responsive. So this is very important. You're modeling reactivity, and I think I said that. Was that number 4? So let's tie in number 3. What was number 3? I got to remember what was number 3. See, I told you I might circle around. I might forget what these 4 were I just laid on you, but I'm going to go deeper than that anyway. So your child, if there's any ability for them to learn in the moment, what they're going to learn is through modeling you. And you are modeling reactivity. So you're not actually modeling responsibility for them. So the whole idea, the whole thought of giving children a consequence because it teaches them responsibility is flawed from a neurologic premise. And then we have this whole belief of not only, so I'm gonna say this before I just go bam. So not only do we have this belief that children learn responsibility through these consequences we give them, these reactive consequences we give them, but we believe that they are going to be able to remember them. And they're not going to be able to remember them because their short-term memory is suppressed. So their memory is suppressed. So they're not going to be able to remember. They're not going to learn responsibility because what we're modeling is reactivity. The consequence itself is going to create more stress, which is then going to bring them back to more negative behavior, more stress, more regression, less ability to think clearly, still shut down, suppress memory. And then there's this idea that we are actually supposed to model this being of in control. So you give the child this consequence in this smarmy, inauthentic, disconnected way. Because in reality, when the child's misbehaving, you can't help but be neurologically stressed. So when you are actually saying to the child, oh, I'm really sorry you made that choice. Well, now I'm going to have to make sure you don't have any dessert so I can give you time to think about that choice you made. You're trying to model to that child in that moment that you're in control and that you're not stressed and that you're not stirred up. And really what you're modeling is that you're completely either one, disconnected, or number two, just being fake. You're just not being real. And then number three, you're not connecting to what the child's pain is. You're not connecting to the child's challenge. You're not connecting to the child's stress. So there's all kinds of distortions going on in this experience. Now, before I take you to that deeper place that I was going to take you to, let me say a couple things. Why do we do consequences with children? Why is it so pervasive? Why is it so common that we consequence children for their behavior? Well, number one, it's something we've done for generations and generations and generations. And so what that means is that we do things automatically. We do them on autopilot. And we believe that they work because they do work. For 70% of children, consequences work. Right? This is something really important to remember. Consequences work for 70% of children. But here's the thing with 70% of the children. 70% of the children, anything you do will work because they have the ability to regulate their brains in a way that they can handle a consequence and they can recover from it and they can rebound from it, and they don't have state level memories full of trauma and neglect and overwhelm and shock and threat. So they're able to take a consequence. They're able to do something, be stressed out, misbehave, get a consequence, be upset for a little bit, regulate themselves, and then move on. And maybe even think about not doing it again. Not because they're really worried about the consequence, just because they don't want the hassle. But a child in the 30% range, which is most of the children that I'm speaking to, with the parents of the children who have the foster care adopted, the trauma histories, the sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, the diagnosis, the medication, the children who've been in residential treatment centers, the children who struggle in school and are in special education. Those are the children, the most common children that we do consequences with. They're the children that consequences make it worse because the consequence only stresses out an already stressed out brain. And they've already demonstrated that they don't have the ability to regulate themselves. So because they don't have the ability to regulate themselves, we end up giving them a consequence for their lack of regulatory ability. And it doesn't do them any good. They just move into a place of overwhelm and a place of already not being good enough. And so then underneath that, I'm not going to go there yet. So next level. So what we end up doing is we believe that, and then the whole movement, the whole Love and Logic, Give Children Consequences movement is based on this idea of natural consequences. Well, what about natural consequences, Brian? Consequences are natural. What about those? Well, natural consequences, you can't control them. You can't prevent them. You can't create them. That's why they're called natural, because they happen automatically. They happen naturally, and we all of us experience natural consequences in life. We all experience natural consequences. If we wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and we don't turn the light on and we stub our toe, that's a natural consequence of not turning on the light. But if you wake up in the middle of the night and you don't turn the light on and your spouse stomps on your toe and says that's the consequence for not turning on the light, that is not a natural consequence. If you are stressed out and you mess up, you knock something over and you break something and your spouse says, well, you're not going to get any dessert tonight, that's not a natural consequence. See, there's a difference between a natural consequence and a formulated consequence. And the consequences that you've been taught are natural or not natural. They're formulated consequences. They are formulated ways to create more stress for your child under the auspices of teaching them. And the reason we buy into it is because we're stressed. We're stressed. And when someone gives you a way to have more control over your child, what they're doing is they're giving you a way to try to soothe your fear. But it's an illusion. Creating more stress for a child does not soothe your fear. That's why the response is oftentimes so disconnected. It's not authentic to what the child is experiencing. Now, I kept saying, I'm going to take you deeper. Now, here's where I'm going to hammer this home. If you're working with a child who has a trauma history and you give that child a consequence for their behavior, you are saying to that child, you are communicating to that child both on a conscious and on an unconscious level that you are responsible for the trauma that you have experienced. If you truly do believe that this child in your home did not cause the trauma in their life, did not create the neglect and the abuse in their life, and you know that this child 98% of the cases suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, and you still intentionally choose to consequence that child for a stress-driven, fear-driven, trauma-driven behavior, then you're telling that child that they are essentially to blame for the bad things that have happened to them. And you do that on an unconscious level. We don't do that intentionally. We do that unconsciously because we've not thought through exactly what we're doing when we give children consequences. Angela wrote a question. We have a child that gives self-conscious. I think there was a misspelling there, so I'm not getting that word, that we have to help him remove. I'm not sure. He punishes himself way more than okay. We have a child that gives himself consequences that we have to help him remove. He punishes himself in way more than any consequence we could ever give him. Oh, well, there's a couple of different levels to that. Number one, when you have a child who has absolutely no self-worth and they feel like punishment is the only way to devalue themselves, to prove that they are unworthy and they are trying to be worthy in the eyes of the people who love them, that punishment is the only answer to their behavior, then they punish themselves just to tear themselves down even more. So that's really sad. And then number two, the number two part of that is these children, these traumatized children that many of you are raising, because I don't know how many parents I have actually watched Post Daily Dose or actually that I actually reach who haven't had children who've experienced trauma. So most of the time, the parenting I'm talking about is targeted for parents of traumatized children. But I gotta tell you, even children who have normal development have experienced trauma too, and you have a really sensitive child. It's because they have a trauma in their history. But the thing is, with biological homes, normal homes where there's not a lot of overt trauma, a lot of times even when there's been trauma, there's enough consistency and predictability to help that child heal. The child doesn't end up going from one biological figure and moved into another home and then maybe moved into another home and moved into another home. They don't go from one form of trauma and abuse and end up in another form of trauma and abuse and end up in 27 different placements and on 5 different medications and with 4 different diagnoses and then 3 trips to the residential treatment centers and then possibly a group home stay and then come back to a family of origin that's not even their family of origin. You know what I'm saying? So the challenges are so much more compounded. But what I'm trying to tell you is there is no consequence you can give these children that's worse than the experiences they've had already in their freaking lives. That's really what I'm trying to tell you. At the end of the day, the punishment-based model in Love and Logic is a punishment-based model. Love and logic, there's no logic in Love and Logic. It's love and illogic. And there's no love. There's no love in Love and Logic because it's fear-based. It's fear-based. It's all geared towards control and punishment and teaching the child a lesson and really, truly, the parent having to take very little responsibility other than to be creative enough to come up with, 20 different consequences for when the child misbehaves. So there's really no love. It's fear. And then there's no logic, because if it was really logical, you would understand. And I've been saying this for 15 years now. So it's not because of a lack of, hearing it from someone. And Joseph Ledoux said it, and so many other pioneers in the neurosciences say it. You would understand that when a child is stressed out, it's because they're regressed, and you would understand that traumatized children have behavior problems. And you would understand that when a child is stressed, they can't learn effectively. They can't remember. So they are actually in a illogical place. They're not behaving from a logical place. They're behaving from an illogical place. And if you punish the child for the behavior, and the consequence is a punishment, it is not discipline. The definition of discipline is to teach, not to punish. And if you want to be a truly effective disciple, you want your student to be in a clear state of thinking. You want their short-term memory to be effective. So if you truly understand that, then you don't do consequences. If you don't understand it, that means you are in an illogical state too. And that's completely understandable, because negative behavior creates stress in all of us, which invites us towards confused and distorted thinking and suppressed short-term memory, which automatically sets us up for illogical thinking. Well, then, Brian, when is consequences a good idea? When is consequences a good idea? Consequences are never a good idea, in my opinion. But there is something you can do. And let me give you the approach. And I always share this story in my lectures. Let's say you have a child who steals. You take that child to the grocery store and you look at that child and you say, because you steal, I'm going to put you in the basket, you little thief, because that's your consequence to having sticky fingers. Because in the basket, you're not going to be able to get your hands on anything. Now, I want you to feel that. That's reactive. And that's what most consequences are reactive. Let me give you a way to take responsibility, because that's what truly teaches. When we take responsibility, we model to our children how to take responsibility. That's what they learn. You pull up to the store. You've already got it in your mind that when you go into the store, it's stressful, because you've listened to Big Papa enough to know that children steal because it is an external attempt to soothe an internal state. So you already know when your child steals, it's because they're stressed. So you know that going to the store is stressful. So you pull up to the store and you say, honey, you know what? We're going to get in here, we're going to get what we need, and we're going to get on back out, because I know it's really stressful for you, and heck, it can be really stressful for me, especially when I haven't eaten. When I go into the store and I haven't eaten, then I just want to buy everything. Well, I'm glad I had a little snack. You had a little snack before we came shopping, so we're going to get in here and get what we need and get on out. But I want you to hold my hand. We get out of the car. So we're going to hold hands. That way I can keep you safe. And I have held the hand of a 15-year-old before, and he did it unconsciously. I just reached my hand out there. He just grabbed my hand. 15 years old. Kids want to feel safe. Sometimes they just don't. Now, when we got to the front of the store, he let my hand go, which was fine. But you get to the front, get to the store, and you say, honey, you know what? The best way for me to keep you safe. Listen to the words. And you see, I've got to invest more time. I've got to invest more energy. This is taking responsibility. Honey, the best way for me to keep you safe is to have you get in the basket. Because in the basket, I can keep you safe. Now, I know you're 15 years old, but Brian+Post said, Big Papa said, no, I'm just kidding. No, it's not for a 15-year-old, right? With a 15-year-old, have them push the basket. With a 15-year-old, have them hold the basket. But for young ones, put them in the basket. You don't put them in the basket because they're bad. You don't put them in the basket because they did something wrong. You put them in the basket so you can keep them safe, so you can keep them contained. That's how you effectively use responsibility instead of reactive-based consequences. Reactive-based consequences try to put all the onus on the child. When you use responsibility, when you use love-based parenting, love-based parenting requires thought, it requires consciousness, it requires energy, it requires focus, it requires involvement, it requires understanding. See, same thing. I accomplished the same thing. Child gets in the basket. One side, he gets in the basket feeling bad, probably feeling upset with me. Other side, he gets in the basket, he feels safe. He feels loved. He feels understood. Even with your teenagers. And I've had 6 adolescent boys, all with diagnosis, some on medication, all with residential treatment histories. I've had all 6 in a Walmart before, all hanging around me, going up and down the aisles, buying groceries, checking out, getting into Suburban, and going home. 0 problems. By taking responsibility, by communicating, by saying, boys, this is what we're going to do. Need you guys to stay with me. We're going to get in. We're going to get out. We're not going to hang out. It's stressful in here. We're not going to be in here for a long time. That's the problem with consequences, ladies and gentlemen, and that's how you start looking at it different. I hope you'll watch this a couple times. Maybe we'll come back, we'll do more, we'll build on it because I could go even deeper, but I think you get the point. Thank you, Layla, for that amen, and thank you, Brenda. Remember, in any given situation, we always have 2 choices. We always have 2 choices. You can go to Walmart and you can wait and you can punish your child. You can be reactive and you can operate from the same imprints. You can be fearful, you can be stressed, and you can just dump all that on your child. You can go home mad and overwhelmed, and then you've got all that cortisol when you lay down, and you just lay your head down at night and you're just tossing and turning and you're worried because you're projecting into the future. What is my 5-year-old going to be like when he's 20? That's just overwhelming. Or you can stop. You can stop. Take 3 to 10 deep breaths. Slow down. Breathe. Slow down. Think. And choose love. Choose love. Love creates so many possibilities. There's so many possibilities out there for you. You're one breath away from a breakthrough. The next time your child is escalating, you are literally one breath away. One good deep breath from being able to do something different than how you did it last time. In that space, that little bit of space of breath, that's where you're going to find love. God bless each and every one of you. I hope you have a fantastic evening. I hope you lay your head down tonight, and I hope your body is just washed clean of all the cortisol, and I hope it is filled and restored with oxytocin, and I hope in the morning you wake up and you are on fire, you are excited, you are just invigorated, you're revived, and you're ready to make it a fantastic day. Big Papa loves you. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.